We are so excited to invite Trey McIntyre into our discussion of Global Conversations Round 4 from the ground up, where we take a look at pretty much every aspect of ballet, classically adjacent dance, how it is marketed, platformed, taught, sold, paid for, and some issues around it. And we are beyond delighted to welcome Trey McIntyre. Trey, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about you, how you got started in dance, and we'll have to move on. You are a Renaissance man. We'll have to move on and talk about all the other things you do, but how'd you get started?
Well, I began growing up as a creative kid in Wichita, Kansas, and I was really involved in theater, musical theater. That was the main outlet. And I was, I was not an active kid. So I would go to dance auditions and was not able to get through them. So I was able to get into a ballet class. Just it's something I wanted to acquire the skill, right? But if you're a creative kid, I don't know that ballet is exactly the answer, because
Yep.
in the beginning it's so square and rote and it was quite boring. But for me it was also like just a good way to get out of the house. So I would often get dropped off at ballet class and I would skip, like go hang out with friends, or like go.
Of course you did.
Yeah, go get a Slurpee next door or something like that.
You did.
But there was, I went from dance to choreography really within the first year. So I was, at 11, 12. And there was actually a really definitive day when I became a choreographer. Then,
Really?
yeah, I was, of course, I had this new material. Dance was okay. These are building blocks, and I began immediately creating new things. Like that was just my impulse, is to make up new dances. And so, there was one day where I was in the parking lot of the dance school showing some friends some steps I'd made up, and my teacher was inside the classroom watching me through the window from the class that I was supposed to be in at that moment. And so she came outside and asked me what I was doing. And when I told her, there was no punishment for it at all, she said, "Oh, that's interesting. Then why don't you come inside and teach it to the rest of the class?"
That is a great teacher. That is a really good teacher.
She really set me on a course from there. I always thought of myself really in terms of being a choreographer. So even, I went to North Carolina School of the Arts for high school.
Okay.
And as a ballet major, there were no opportunities for choreography. That was solely for,
Really?
yeah, it was all for the modern department back then. It wasn't really talk about not creative, it wasn't really a value. It was to be a great technician, really.
Yep.
But I was still in that same path of like grabbing dancers when I could, and we'd go work in the evenings in the studio. And there was a student-run production organization back then called Onyx, that was the name, and we put on our own shows. And so it was really, again, it was the modern faculty who took notice of what I was doing, and I was an outlier. So when the Houston Ballet Academy came through, they were doing their auditions for their summer session for the academy. They had back then the most prominent feature of their summer workshop was a choreographic workshop, and they would have 7 student choreographers who would each make 3 pieces over the course of the summer on fellow students. And so, when Houston was there auditioning, thank goodness the modern faculty spoke up for me and said, "Hey, you should look at this guy, consider him for the workshop."
Yep.
And so that's why I went to Houston. And, and I'll have to say, going to Houston Ballet Academy came at such a perfect time, because, I had a fairly negative experience at North Carolina School of the Arts. It was not, coming from a city like Wichita, Kansas, and, feeling like an outsider in a lot of ways, I felt like, okay, I'm going to go to this creative place with all these, thriving young people. But it was, I have to say, it was kind of a dark place there. But when I came to Houston, it was really, that school was an environment of really thinking about joy of dance and why, why you're making the decisions that you're making. And there was the principal at the time, Rosemary Miles is her name. I remember it was on day 1 or day 2, she came over and she threw herself on the floor, wrapped herself around my feet, and she said, "Your tendus are so heavy." And I never like, no teacher really had like put themselves in it and like just wanted to be crazy and to make a point in that way. And I thought, okay, this is where it's at. And they really embraced me, and they embraced my creativity and kept making opportunities for me, and I think it's better now, but back then, this is the late 80s. There weren't many opportunities for ballet choreographers to develop. The process of opportunity usually went, you became maybe a famous dancer first, and then, oh, what would you like to do for your transition?
Yep.
Let's choreography. So, starting out in that way, I was in a very unique position. And, Ben Stevenson, who was the director of the company at the time, he kept just opening doors. I was a kid working with professional dancers in the company. And, eventually he created a position in the company, which was Choreographic Apprentice. And so I held that position. And what that essentially meant was I was there as a dancer. I was in the corps de ballet, but with a focus on, they were really giving me a salary so I could develop as a choreographer. And, giving me the space to learn from, some of the people I got to work with in the last years of their life, like Kenneth McMillan, Margot Fontaine,
Wow.
Yuri Killian. I got to work with, dancers from Paul Taylor, and not to mention Ben Stevenson and Christopher Bruce, who was the resident choreographer there. That was really, I really felt like if I ever had a college, of learning about any craft and choreography, it was the college of experience.
I've never asked this, and it just occurred to me, is there a choreographer's equivalent of writer's block ever? Or did it happen to you?
Certainly, that's a great question, because I've thought about that a lot over my career. I certainly have had it in the past, but it went away kind of with a revelation. I don't tend to get information in terms of like big aha moments. Like I think lessons are learned over time usually, but this was one where I kind of woke up to the idea that, oh, writer's block or creative block is actually an invented thing. There's kind of no such thing as it. What that really means is that, oh, I've lapsed into my ego, and I've lapsed into this place of what are people going to think of me, and this has to be good. And but really, possibility is unlimited. That's the essence of creativity. It can be anything. So if my hand's not here, my hand's here, and imagine all the different, every little possibility. So if that's not working for me, well, you haven't explored that one, and there's hardly enough time to explore all the possibilities. So now, and that, I definitely think that came with time and with confidence and having, okay, I don't have to prove myself in every single dance. But now I really do feel like I approach, each new work very bravely and open-heartedly, and I'm hoping to always go somewhere new. So I haven't experienced it in a long time.
That is great. I get it all the time with writing, and it is that very infinite possibility. And perhaps if I find exactly the right word, I will convince somebody. So you're right. I don't know if it's ego, reverse ego. You put a lot of pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about you being a freelance choreographer, which is not the most certain profession, particularly in these times. Why have you chosen that path? What are the wonderful things about it, and what are the tough parts?
In starting, I had my own dance company for about 10 years, and that was, doing that was really a big part of it was, oh, like freelancing is so bad, and the worst part of it for me was, and this will speak to now, what maybe is the worst part of it is not having your own group of dancers that you keep returning to, certain ideas that, one must continually teach to a new group of people. And, there wasn't that feeling of growth. I don't feel that now after having had a company. Like once I learned, speaking of grass is always greener, what it is to actually have a responsibility of the day-to-day of a group of people, I finally realized, oh my God, a freelance choreographer, it's the most privileged position in the world. Now I get to waltz in, I can be as creative or insane, or, I can explore and ask, and, and it's a bit of a love affair, right? Because for the dancers, you're a new person, it's a fling, it's not a marriage,
Work.
So,
Yeah.
so it could be, there's a certain kind of like creative joy, in some ways the freelance relationship speaks more to the archetype of muse, like we're both fantasizing about who the other person is because we don't know who they are.
So it's not just a one way, the female is the muse and you imprint on her. It's it's a back and forth relationship, which is interesting. I haven't heard of it that way before. You said, which I thought was extraordinary, that the pandemic has been a really joyful time for you, even though a ballet that was going to premiere, or work that was going to premiere at the Houston Ballet got shut down that night.
Yeah. I think the actual shutdown was maybe more traumatic for the dancers than for me. I'm someone who really appreciates the process more than the performance. Certainly it was disappointing, but it was more that it was kind of a suspended creative state because, we had just come off this, what I find to be a very intimate relationship, working in the studio and creating this thing. And there wasn't, it was more like, okay, what are we going to do now? So I was in Houston and I made the choice to stay because I was living in Brooklyn at the time.
Okay.
And New York was just getting terrible at that moment. And I thought, you know what, count your blessings and stay where you are. And I thought, of course, Texas will be fine from here
no
on.
problems in Texas. I just went through that storm. Ooh.
Boy. So I just got an Airbnb and stayed in town. And, I've been interested in dance filmmaking and documentary filmmaking as well for quite some time. And when I had my company, did a lot of experimenting using film. And so I thought, okay, here's the thing that we can do. I thought certainly we can find a way to safely work on some short dance films outdoors, with solos or, with people who are quarantined together. And just had this idea to put together these little pods. And I didn't want to ask people to work for free because it was just that, that moment in history that was so like, I just kind of felt like, well, this would be an easy moment to take advantage of people because they're stuck at home and they want to do something. And I thought, it's such an insecure time. Let me see if I could fundraise for it. So I was able to get some very generous individual donors to each give $2,000 for each little work. And what I did with that was I had a group of 4 people. So it would be myself, a dancer, a designer, and then a musician to create an original work. And, I went to them as a group and just said, hey, listen, we have this bit of money. We're all going to get paid exactly the same. Let's just do an egalitarian split. And lo and behold, people were so enthused by that idea. Like they're like, okay, yeah, we're all in the same, we all have the same buy-in. And that worked really well. And so I've had a Patreon account for my photography for some time, and I've achieved a modest success with that, and it's something that's supported my photography. And I thought, okay, well, maybe during this period, it's going to be a while till I'm back on stage. What if I transitioned these kinds of works to a crowd-funded Patreon kind of setting? And that seemed like a real natch, like an easy thing for me. Not easy is like relative, but a lot of work, but like I knew what I was doing. And so as soon as I had that thought, I thought, what, this is actually so much bigger than me and the films that I want to make. This could be a really interesting platform where I could actually connect with other artists and provide opportunities for people and, work on something that I really enjoy, which is audience development, and seeing how I can expand this field of what's, I think, really a new form. Making video content to be viewed in this way or on your phone, it's different. And
very different.
And we've got some things to work out. And so I liked this idea of building a community around that. And so I started this crowd-funded platform called Flatpak. That's basically been, people pledge a monthly amount to support artists. And, basically the whole pot gets divided up equally amongst everyone involved. And which
is extraordinary because it's the reverse of sort of the usual hierarchical structure, or a celebrity choreographer who brings in his people, right? So his costume designer, his, et cetera. And then it's negotiated in advance. And then, the company or the festival or whatever gets it out there, disseminates it. It's a great idea. It's much more collaborative, much more interesting. What has worked about Flatpak and what has not worked?
I think one thing I underestimated was just kind of how shell-shocked all of these artists are. And, I think like where I was in a position of like, okay, let's do the next thing. What's the opportunity right now? I think a lot of artists that I communicated with, they needed some time to just kind of sit with what was happening and use the space. And that was, those were really easy conversations. You were either in a mindset of like, I feel like doing something with this time, or I feel like re-examining my life. And I've seen that all the way through the arts community. I mean, so many dancers during this time have either refortified their love for what they do, or they've decided, you know what, I'd like to spend my time doing something else. And just because I have invested so much doesn't mean I can't pivot. That's been one thing. You know, the having an audience and a community and people talking about the idea of what they're seeing, and you know, as a viewing community, you know, breaking open, well, what is a dance film and what do I want out of it? And you know, all of that part of it has been really fulfilling for me. I've loved that. And I do think I would say with very few exceptions, the egalitarian nature of pay has been a real success. And people, like, a lot of comments have been about like, oh, it somehow gets me back in touch with my early version of why I wanted to do this. You know, I realized my quest for status has kind of gotten me out of, oh, I really love to make dance. And, you know, there is then everybody's invested in, okay, we're all audience builders then, right? Because the more people who are there when it's crowdfunded, the more everybody gets paid, not just me, or we all get paid. That part's been a real success. I think the biggest challenge, and this is not something I was blind to, but you know, there was a tremendous amount of content just right off the bat. Everybody was just putting all their stuff out online and creating a precedent where that work is given. It's given for free.
Yes.
And you know, I think that's our relationship with the internet. You know, it's just this vast world out there. A paywall is a tough thing, and honestly, maybe this is just my gut, but I think the paywall difficulty is even less about what the money is, because you know, we had a very, like, you can join the platform for $2 a month.
Wow.
It's not a huge investment.
That is pretty affordable. Yeah.
But the investment is, oh my God, do I have to get my credit card out? And is this going to work? And like, you know, that mundane frustration is enough to keep people out of something where they can't even actually see what it is that's on the other side. So that's, yeah, I think that was maybe the biggest challenge. And I don't think it's insurmountable, but it's maybe a thing that's insurmountable for a company of one, you know?
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. So I caught up with you in Houston, and then it was Brooklyn, but now it's London, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So somewhat peripatetic. What prompted the move?
Well, so let's see, after kind of like, you know, trying to be in different spots, because I was a little bit homeless during the pandemic. I was going to buy an apartment in New York.
Okay.
And, you know, I put all my stuff into storage, and that fell through while I was in Houston. So I was back to being a nomad. And, you know, it didn't seem like, you know, I was in no hurry to sort of decide what the next move was, just because nobody knows nobody knew, especially in the beginning where we were all going.
Right.
I have a good buddy who has a flat here in London. And she said, well, why don't you just go spend some time there? She's like, the community is not going to be that much different from the US. Everybody's having the same experience, but, you know, you might as well be in a different environment.
Yeah.
And so I came and stayed in her place, and it was almost immediately off the airplane. My sense was, okay, it's time to make the move here. And it's not for practical reasons. It was, I want to expand my worldview, and not from afar. I want to experience a different culture. And this was in the early stages of Flat Pack as well. And so I thought I want to also be closer to artists who have not been in my circle, to people who I wouldn't necessarily have, you know, FaceTime with, and being closer to Europe seemed like it would really help that. So yeah, I'm just looking for a new experience of myself, and a new experience of myself in a different place.
I think it's wonderful. I will say one of the things I want to talk to you about, push you a little bit, and there's a number of issues. You don't have family obligations. You don't have kids you have to take care of. You don't have to figure out, and we've written a lot about this, but the unequal burden, the expectations on women who are trying to choreograph while at the same time they're trying to homeschool their kids, and at the same time they may be taking care of older parents. And I think that's a huge reality that a lot of people in the dance world really don't think about, which is, your creative options are very much tied to where you need to be for your kids or your family, et cetera. And that's part of the reason that we're so interested in talking to women like Kathy Marston, but even those who are like, running associations, because they have to organize everything around their kids. I had one interview with, she's extraordinary, Liza Richards-Toney, and one of her kids kind of zoomed past in the background, right? And that's a reality. I think that if you're a guy and you don't have kids, it's not as front and center for you in terms of the choices you make regarding creativity.
Heck yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, there's one choreographer, Belgian choreographer, who, I check in with her once a month because she just had a baby and she really wants to do flat pack and really wants to do the project. And when, it's just, I just put myself in the position with her. It's like, when you're ready, I'm here to support you and the work you want to do. But I mean, I very early on in terms of the scope of the project, and this is just from having the experience of having run a dance company, limited the scale and the scope of even what we would approach. Like, for example, fundraising for the films cost money to make, this money is just to give people some kind of salary and something to live off of. But everybody's still on their own. In that way in terms of that fundraising. But yeah, I'm fully aware of the privileged position that I live my life from. I mean, part of it just through what like the body I was born into, and part of it in the way that I've structured my life, and made choices to make sure I've had freedom in that way.
Yeah. So branching off of that, part of what I want to talk about is pay and fellowships and residencies, and how important they are to a career as a dance maker, freelance artist, but also the pay structure. So there were some friends of ours at Makeshift in Europe noted that the Venice Biennial with, I think, Wayne McGregor invited dancers to come to one of the most expensive cities in Europe and have the privilege of working with a choreographer for 3 months. The only thing that was paid, however, was their housing. So the food, no salary, no nothing, and they had to get themselves there. And that troubles me a lot, because so often in the dance profession, I think particularly women are underpaid or not paid at all for their work. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about the opportunities that those residencies offer, but also the issue around pay equity, which clearly you're concerned about because you created a collaborative funding model.
Yeah, it's such a fine line, isn't it? Because when talking about artists and creating art, when we swing our awareness too far onto one side, when it comes about the living and the nitty gritty, we get out of that fantasy place. It grounds it, and in some ways can have a detriment to the work. I think one must have a careful conversation with it. Because both are equally important. If we're going to make our lives doing this, then we have to earn a living, and everyone should earn a fair living. And hierarchies and systems that discriminate, it's just we're so far beyond it, and the fact that we're dealing with some of the things that we are is embarrassing, I think. And like in the example that you give, it's I think, well, for as a young dancer myself, I probably would have jumped all over that opportunity. Any way that I could have just gotten some new information, distinguished myself in a certain way to get that information. I mean, I would have paid for it. But that doesn't mean, I think that there has to be a top-down re-examination of the why of that. If it becomes a way to, how do I say this? Like, if it's an impossibility to pay all those people to do that, meaning there just isn't the money to do it, and there's not the person to raise that money, because raising money is a huge, gigantic, full-time, never-ending job.
Sure. On the other hand, one cannot imagine. I mean, if Wayne McGregor is doing it, and I'm sure, as somebody pointed out, his salary, he was getting a salary. And it's a fairly rich organization. I mean, you're right, it's nuanced, right? And a 1 week residency is very different than 3 months when you have to pay to get to Venice. But I do think it's worthwhile talking about the assumptions underlying the economy of dance and who gets to make dance and how it's funded. I also want to talk a little bit about mentorship, because it sounds like you were sort of, after you got out of School for the Performing Arts, you got to Houston, you were sort of embraced and doors were open for you and you got to work with a ton of great people. Talk about the effect of mentorship and also how you feel about mentoring. I don't know if you've done any of it and what that affords a choreographer.
Yeah, I mean, the form of mentorship, I was going to say membership, that's maybe a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
The form of it was really only opportunity, and like I have no complaint about that, but there was really no part of it was in the form of advice or feedback, or it was almost just like, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. Amazing, like really great. And I think again, that's why we must address the equity of who those opportunities are given to, because
that's obviously where I was going.
Yeah, my career would not have happened without that being given to me. And that's not, I use the give and not, and it's not that I didn't deserve it. I mean, I presented qualities that made them want to do that. But I think that leaders have to be conscious about, okay, if the only people I deem worthy of that going to are white men, why is that? What am I doing to support that, and who those candidates?
I'm not necessarily picking them, but that's who shows up.
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute.
Right.
Or even just men, period, right? Because I think we lose so much. I mean, it's very frustrating for me sitting in the audience. I've said this a million times, when I don't see anything sometimes, but what is it? I think we figured out it was like almost 2/3 of the time, if you're in the United States and you go to the ballet, you will not see a woman on the program. So you open up the book and it's female contributors, donors. You look around, it's female audience, who's packing the classes. But when you go to see a vision, 2/3 of the time, you might not actually see a woman at all, which is pretty extraordinary. I think that sort of, however that's, to use a Harry Potter sort of metaphor, how that sorting hat eventually ends up, right?
Yeah. And it's just so old fashioned, I mean, it's really like this idea of just, I can only picture a man as a leader, I really think that's what it's our habit around that. Even if we think it's not. To the other part of your question, I have had some really fortunate opportunities to be a mentor. I enjoy that role a lot.
Yeah, it would seem like you would be great at it.
Thanks. That's a nice compliment. I like trying to figure out what somebody really needs. And one time that I thought worked really well was Ballet X in Philadelphia. They have a choreographic mentorship program, and I did that my their first year of doing that. So I was the trial.
We're huge fans of Christine's. I mean, I think she's up to like 200 world premieres in 15 years. I mean, she is such a dynamo. I didn't realize you did that. And I bet it would be fun, right?
She was the lead in one of my pieces for Pennsylvania Ballet. So I know her from way back.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. That's great.
So the choreographer was Yin Yu, Chinese choreographer, the year that I did it. And, I think the challenge in that was I was choreographing at the same time, because I wish I could have given her more presence, but of course I'm making my at the same time. But, what she really wanted to know about, and this is apropos of our conversation, is how do I make my living doing this? It wasn't so much about craft and dance. It's how do I get commissions? How do I deal with, negotiating with directors? Like, that was the kind of information she wanted. So, and I think in some ways thankful, because those are conversations that can happen at the end of the day and don't require me to be in her.
Yeah, and you'd live that experience. I mean, I would say that is part of the mentorship. Maybe it's more than half of the mentorship is, as you were discussing earlier, the nitty gritty of the work versus the reality, right? Bureau of Labor Statistics, dancer choreographers overwhelmingly female, much bigger gender pay gap. And many more of them living close to the poverty line than other creative industries, which are more male, frankly, which is really, so there's your economic reality. I want to switch a little bit to, before we finish up, to what you got going and what's interesting you. As I mentioned, you're kind of a Renaissance person. You like dance film. You're an accomplished photographer. What are you working on now, and how does that inform Flatpack and where you might see it going?
A couple of different things. I've had so many requests from people wanting to have a coffee table book of the photography that I make.
I'll sign up. I'm there.
Okay. Well, I think we're in I think we're in a little bit of a transitional period in terms of publishing, and so it's been hard to make it happen in terms of print. I'm not a known entity as a photographer. So what I'm doing is experimenting with interactive ebooks and a presentation of photography that, of course, there's something lost in not having that page in front of you that you could sit on your couch. So, I'm leaning into, well, what are the opportunities in technology that can lend more to a photograph? How can you flip the page and maybe hear content from me about how we got to the photograph?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you look at the image and then you hear the creator saying, here's what I was thinking about. That's very cool.
Cool. Yeah. So that's one thing. And then Flatpack is evolving. So, as I said before, the paywall part of it, I think, is maybe too big of a hurdle for what I want to work on at this point. So instead, I'm going to launch basically a curated site of what's happening now in digital art, not just in dance, but across the board. What's the, like, basically I'll spend a lot of my time scouring the world and talking to people and scouring the internet and presenting in a really fun interactive site where people can explore and learn about things they want to learn about, but hopefully be turned on to some new stuff that they hadn't heard about before. I mean, all the time, this is one of my favorite things from Flatpack. I was talking to a guy here that works in real estate in London. I mean, not involved in the arts world, but he lent me his a bus depot that he owns as a place to film. And so I've kind of gotten him involved, gotten him to follow, me on Instagram. Out of the blue the other day, he started talking to me about one of the Flatpack choreographers in LA that had nothing to do with the project we did. He started following this guy on Instagram, and now he's showing people in his work, hey, look at this really cool photographer, not a dance person. And so, like, to see those little ripple effects out of just turning people on the new
Very
thing.
organic, which is great. And I think a lot of us, I mean, my job is to promote, my mission is to promote women in dance leadership, but that's led me to a lot of sites like Oregon Arts Weekly and let's see, Archery in Boston and All Arts. There's some great ones coming out of Britain. And that's sort of that's my mental rest and joy, is going on some of these Hyperallergic, LA Times, just these wonderful sites where you get dance, but you also get visual arts and poetry, et cetera. It's really fun.
What a great time to be alive.
Yeah. And hopefully you're coming out of the pandemic. And on that really cheerful, wonderful note, thank you so much, Trey McIntyre, for joining us for Global Conversations. We can't wait to see how Flatpack is going to evolve, what your next project is going to be. And it's been a ton of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for including me, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really important.
You're welcome.